Today's episode takes you inside what many call the greatest crime against women in the world and introduces you to a woman who has spent years confronting it head on. Reggie Littlejohn is the Yale-trained attorney turned global human rights advocate behind Women's Rights Without Frontiers, the organization exposing and fighting forced abortion, gendercide, and sexual slavery in China. She's testified before Congress 8 times, briefed parliaments across the globe, and has become one of the Chinese Communist Party's most hated and outspoken critics. In this conversation, she shares how her childhood shaped her sense of justice, the moment she uncovered the brutal reality behind China's then one-child policy, how she helped build a secret rescue network inside China, and why the CCP surveillance state and looming demographic collapse should alarm every one of us. It's gripping, it's harrowing, and it reveals the shocking reality about the rights of women, girls, and the family in China today. Welcome to the Bioethics Babe podcast, where we examine the tough questions in human flourishing in light of science, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Arina Grosso-Agnew. Now let's dive in. Today's guest is one of the world's most fearless voices for human rights and national sovereignty. Reggie Littlejohn is the founder and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, a global coalition fighting to end forced abortion, gendercide, and the sexual slavery in China. She is also the founder and president of the Anti-Globalist Alliance, an international counterforce to the Great Reset, and the co-founder of the Sovereignty Coalition, a non-partisan movement dedicated to defending U.S. national sovereignty and personal medical freedom against threats both foreign and domestic. An attorney and graduate of Yale Law School, Reggie is widely recognized as the international expert on China's one-child policy, now the three-child policy. She has testified before the United States Congress 8 times and has delivered high-level briefings at the European Parliament, the British, Irish, Canadian, and Estonian parliaments, at The Hague, the United Nations, the State Department, the White House, the Israeli Knesset, and even at the Vatican. Her work and commentary have been featured across major media platforms, including the BBC, CNN, CBN, C-SPAN, Fox News, The American Thinker, Breitbart, Voice of America, and many others. Reggie Littlejohn is one of those rare voices who brings legal expertise, international credibility, and moral clarity to some of the toughest human rights issues of our time. She has spent decades confronting tyranny, exposing injustice, and defending the dignity and freedom of the most vulnerable people among us. And I'm thrilled to have her on the show today. Welcome, Ms. Littlejohn.
Thank you so much, Arina, for your very generous introduction. And you can just call me Reggie. I mean, we're friends, so.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think people are in for a wild ride with what you have to share today. So I wanted to start off, Reggie, about if there's a moment in your childhood or youth that shaped your sense of justice and human rights, and when you first realized you wanted to defend vulnerable people.
Well, I was very fortunate to grow up in my household with my father, who was a judge in Los Angeles. And he was the chief judge of the dependency section of the juvenile court system. So the dependency section is the section where you have the dependents of the court. Well, why are these people dependents of the court? These kids are dependents of the court because they've had to be removed from their parents. And in the process of just listening to these heart-rending cases, and some of which he brought home some of these stories that I grew up with over the dinner table, he realized that there was a lawyer for the state, there was a lawyer for the mother, there was a lawyer for the father, and there was no one representing just the voice of the child. So he founded something called the CASA program. It was originally called Guardian Ad Litems, but CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates, just to advocate for the child in these tremendously difficult circumstances, and also to be their friend and somebody like a pillar of stability in their lives during this horrible time in their lives. And that program, he wrote the original federal grant. It was a huge success, and it's been copied nationally and now even internationally. So my father remains just a huge inspiration for me. You know, he passed away at age 96, but God, you know, may he rest in peace. But the the stories that he brought home of the injustices that were happening to these kids really broke my heart. It made a very deep impression on me. And then also his initiative in saying, I'm going to do something about this, and founding well, I mean, he just founded it in Los Angeles, but then it went all over the country and in different parts of the world, that you can have just a major impact, that one person can have a major impact. So that was sort of a founding experience for me.
That's beautiful, and obviously that carried through to your work for vulnerable children and vulnerable people in general. So you trained as an attorney, guess following in your father's footsteps. What drew you to law initially? Was it your dad? Was it other things too? And what kind of work did you do in the early years of your legal career?
Well, okay, so my family, we had 6 kids in my family, and you had to basically be an advocate for yourself to get a word in edgewise, or certainly to get, like, seconds on anything, any of the food. I mean, our family has its own culture, and, you had to be a strong advocate for yourself and for your position in that, just around that dinner table. And my dad, really loved to spar with me in particular. I don't know why, but we had like these sparring matches. They were always really good natured and stuff. But I mean, he was sharpening my mind, and I think intentionally so, to become an advocate. And, I got a lot of encouragement from him and my mom. I don't wanna leave my mother out of this. My mother was a saintly soul, extremely pro-life, very, very faithful, and, she passed away as well, and, I miss them both every day, but I try to carry on their legacy through my work. My parents always encouraged me to shoot for the top, and I remember reading when I was about 12 years old, I read a list in the newspaper of the top law schools in the country, and Yale was number 1, and showed it to my dad. I said, I'm gonna go to Yale Law School," and he said, "Okay, you do it." So I that was like an aim from the time I was like 12 years old. So anyway.
Well, I'm sure they're very proud of you, and that when they were here, they were very proud of the work that you did and you are doing. So what were the types of law you did at the beginning of your legal career?
Oh, I was a complex commercial litigator. So, but the thing that was great about it was, that, I was at very, at top law firms, and they had something called a pro bono policy. So law firms can make a decision that in order to give back to the community, they will just do work for free. And then they can choose the kind of work that they do. And like I was practicing in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there are many opportunities to help people. And so my law firms supported me in helping Chinese refugees. I had a couple of cases of Chinese refugees who were applying for asylum in the United States, meaning that they were persecuted in China, and they were persecuted on the basis of coercive population control. One of my clients, my first client, was forcibly sterilized. She had
Mm.
2 children, so she had violated the one-child policy, and they dragged her out of her home screaming and crying and pleading, and held her down to a table and performed a tubal ligation, which is major abdominal surgery, without anesthesia, and she ended up with a massive infection and was permanently disabled after that, to the till many years later when she came, to me as an asylum client. And from her and from another client that I also represented, I learned that the propaganda, that the Chinese Communist Party was pumping out, that most of the world believed, that I had believed, was that the one-child policy was voluntary. I mean, I'd heard at the time, this is in the mid-90s, I'd heard that China had a one-child policy. I never stopped to think how it was enforced. And China had been saying basically, this is voluntary. And when I found out that it was actually enforced through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and even infanticide, I left the practice of law, and that's a long story in itself that I don't wanna get into right now, but I actually had to leave on a medical leave of absence, because I had basically driven myself into the ground as a lawyer with all-nighters and all that kind of stuff. But, and when I came out of that long illness, I had prayed to God, "Lord, if you allow me to live, I would like, I would like my life to be worth living. I would like, instead of staying up all night fighting for some huge company, I would like, if I'm gonna stay up all night, I want it to be on behalf of, your people, or your will. And I prayed to him, "Please just break my heart for whatever breaks your heart." And
Mhm.
he broke my heart for the women and babies of China, like the ones that I had been representing. And so then I came out and I founded Women's Rights Without Frontiers, which is our original vision was to end forced abortion in China under the one child policy. And it was originally an advocacy organization. So, I can let you ask questions, or I can just keep talking,
Well, when did
because
you found that? When did you find
in 2008 was the first time I appeared, and my first appearance was at the European Parliament, and I can talk about that. I think that the organization's nonprofit status was granted in, like, 2011, August 8th of 2011, I believe. But I had already been working under that banner for several years by the time we were granted nonprofit status.
Were there other organizations doing the type of, work in China at the time, or were you filling a gap that just wasn't, being addressed?
Well, let me talk about my experience at the European Parliament. Uh, so when I was sick, I just became obsessed with analyzing what was going on with the one-child policy and all the horrible, ramifications coming from it. And I got an email from I signed up for everybody's email list. Anybody who's doing Chinese human rights, I was on their email list. I got an email, just a blast, from an e-blast from an organization called Human Rights Without Frontiers. And, they said that they were having a summit at the European Parliament about, human rights in China. And so I emailed the president, which is something I'd never done before. I said, "Great list of experts, great list of issues. How come no one is talking about the one child policy?"
Mhm.
And he wrote back to me. This guy is an elite Chinese human rights expert. Wrote back to me and said, "Don't you realize, my dear, that the one child policy is a thing of the past and it's all voluntary now?" And I said, "Oh, really?" And that's when
Mm.
my advocacy, just and kicked in, and I said, "Well, what about this document? What about this document? What about this document? This doc-" And he said, "Okay, Miss Littlejohn, I give up." I understand that the one child policy is enforced through forced abortion. Will you be our expert and come
Mm.
to the European Parliament at our expense and be the first person to testify about this?" And I almost fell out. I mean, I was wearing my little red pajamas and I was sick. I was like coming out of this long illness. And all of a sudden, I'm like speaking at the European Parliament. So, of course, I said yes. And I went there and I talked about it. And then I talked to all the other experts. Everybody had their issue, they had different issues. And they all said to me, "You need to do something about this because no one else is doing anything."
Mm.
They said, "We all know that this is happening, but it's one of many issues for all of us. No one has taken it up as her issue, and that's it." So, I mean, there are
Wow.
other organizations, and there's, another person, Stephen Mosier, who way before me had been the initial one, like in the 80s, to expose this. But after his big expose, the Chinese propaganda machine, was able to put out enough propaganda that people had forgotten about what Steve Mosier said, and were now thinking that it was voluntary. And then the Chinese human rights community was begging me to take up this issue. And then the thing that's funny about it is that, I don't have a degree in Chinese study. I don't speak Chinese. I was not ever planning on becoming an expert on that issue. But once I testified at the European Parliament, all of a sudden, all the news agencies were, contacting me as the world expert on this. And I had been planning to go back to what I was doing before. But then I thought, you know what? Maybe this is something I should pursue. And that's when I decided to found Women's Rights Without Frontiers and advocate for it. So, yeah, I think that there was a gap that no one was really filling. Just think about it, okay? China has 1/5 of the population in the world. So in the early 2000s, which is when I, was researching this, and 1 in 5 women was living under a regime where she could be forcibly aborted if she didn't have a birth
Mm.
permit at any time. That's just it's the biggest women's
Wow.
right and even human rights violation in the world just because of the sheer numbers involved.
Mhm.
And no one had taken that as their sole issue. So I took it up.
Mhm. Well, we're so glad that you did. What were some of the early challenges in launching such a sensitive and dangerous line of advocacy?
Well, I take, precautions on my safety. Um, the thing about being an American, not of Chinese origin, is that I am way safer than people inside of China or even people from China in the United States. I know that my asylum clients were terrified of Chinese operatives in the United States that could harm them. And that problem persists to this day, I believe. People from China who are uh, dissidents in the United States face, I think, a lot more danger than I do. I mean, it's not like I don't have any danger, but if I ever feel like, oh, I'm in danger, I just think about the people from China who are in a whole lot more danger than I am.
Mhm. Did you get pushback from anyone or any groups when you were first launching this organization?
Yeah, I mean, this was so long ago, but yeah, there was a break into my computer and I
Oh.
called the FBI, because I suspected it was from a Chinese source and, they investigated and they said, "Yeah, this is a Chinese source that has broken into your computer." I had tried to sort of protect my identity before that, and I wanted to protect my family, my kid. I had a young kid at home, and once they broke into my computer, then I knew that they knew where I lived, the name of my kid, all my tax returns. I mean, just think of all the sensitive
Mhm.
pictures and, and everything else on your computer. And so I spent like several days just shaking. Like I felt like I was shaking inside and I was just shaking. And at the end of it, at the end of like 3 days of shaking, I just said, you know what? I have nothing to lose at this point. And then I actually went way more public than what I had been doing before, way more public. So that kind of backfired on them.
Mhm.
And there was another time when I got a call from some like Chinese news organ in London, and the person said in her British accent, she said, "You've got to stop talking about forced abortion in China." And I said, "Oh, really? Why?" And she said, "Because it's not true." And I said, "Okay, you think it's not true? Let's have a debate. You get your witnesses to say it's not true, and I'll get my witnesses that have been forcibly aborted, and then we'll let
Mhm.
the public decide whether it's true or not." Okay? And she said, "Well, that will never happen." And I said, "And that's why I will never shut up until you guys stop forcibly
Mhm.
aborting women." So, I mean, they've tried,
Mhm.
they and they just gave up on me. I haven't had
Mhm.
any actually, I did. It's like 3 years ago, I went to mass, and after mass, this person walks up to me, and he said, "Are you Reggie Littlejohn?" I went to mass, in a for I was on vacation, so this is in Florida, I'd never been there before, and I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Yes, I'm Reggie Littlejohn." He said, "I'm a member of the intelligence community, and I want you to know that you are the second most hated person in the world by the Chinese Communist
Mhm.
Party." I said, "Really? Who's first?" Who's number 1 is Cheng Wen-chen, who is a dear friend of mine, and I spearheaded his, international campaign, and he's somebody who was exposing this stuff from Chinese soil.
Mhm.
Okay, that's the real hero. But anyway, he said, "You should watch your back because they hate you. I mean, they really, really, really hate you." I'm like,
Mhm.
"Okay." I mean, I don't really know what I'm gonna do that's any different than what I already do. But so that was more recent. That was like 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, that means you're very effective.
It takes some effort to become the number 2 most hated person by the Chinese Communist Party.
I would wear it as a badge. How would you summarize WRWF's mission and how it has evolved since the abolition of China's one-child policy?
Okay, so like I said, our original mission was we were an advocacy organization. I am an advocate, a lawyer, so what our main issue, our main um purpose was to expose and oppose forced abortion in China. And I was very fortunate because there was a man and a woman in China. She was forcibly aborted at 7 months,
Mm.
and, they were so shattered by that experience that they made the decision that they didn't care whether they would die, they were going to expose this. So he went to his village and the surrounding villages and took pictures and interviewed people who were being forcibly aborted, forcibly sterilized, beaten to a pulp because they had missed their cervical checkup, okay,
Mm.
by a few days. People whose I have a photograph of a woman whose home was torn down by her parents because she missed her cervical checkup. And so he was documenting all this stuff and he got it out of China, and into the hands of a friend of mine, another human rights organization, and gave it to me because it was pertinent to what I was doing, and that would form the basis of I think it was my first testimony at the U.S. Congress, and just totally blew out of the water the lie that the one-child policy is not coercively enforced. So from there, I was able to, and don't ask me how, because that's very sensitive information. I was able to establish a network inside of China to help women who were trying to flee from forced abortions. All right.
Mhm.
Then from there, what I realized is that there's government enforced forced abortions. In other words, you don't have a birth permit, therefore we are going to drag you out of your house and forcibly abort you up to the ninth month of pregnancy. So this is what was happening in the 90s and the early 2000s when I founded Women's Rights Without Frontiers. But then there's another kind of forced abortion in China, which is culturally enforced, and that is the sex selective abortion of baby girls. So in China, they have something that is called son preference for cultural reasons, especially in the countryside. Boys are preferred over girls. And it's not just cultural reasons. I mean, I can just say, so they prefer boys over girls because, especially in the countryside, just traditionally the boys were the ones who were the ones who tilled the soil. I mean, they were more valuable as like, help on the farm. But then also they, for traditional culture, the boy is the one who would bury his parents and was able to perform certain spiritual, I don't know, acts, liturgies, or whatever over the ancestors that a girl is not allowed to perform. The boy was considered to be the one who would support his parents in old age. And then, for girls, they would say that, raising a daughter is like watering somebody else's garden. So
Mm.
all the love, all the education, the sacrifice that you put into raising a daughter is just gonna go to somebody else because traditionally the daughter, when they got married, the daughter would go over to the son's family, and the 2 of them would support his parents so that her parents would just be bereft. They have nothing. And there's another saying in China is that we don't love daughters, but we love daughters-in-law. Okay.
Mm.
So there's a big problem with the sex selective abortion of baby girls to the extent that, according to one estimate, and of course, these estimates people don't report, the selective abortion of a baby girl or the abandonment or the infanticide of a baby girl. So, it's not like you have really accurate statistics. But there's one statistic that estimates that there are up to 200 million missing girls in the world today
Mm.
because of sex selective abortion, abandonment, and neglect. The neglect meaning if the boy gets sick, he goes to the hospital immediately. If the girl gets sick, she doesn't go to the hospital. She'll get better, and then she doesn't get better. And in China, there's an estimated, the estimates vary, but up to 40 million more men than women living in China today, and that has its own host
Mhm.
of implications, which I'm happy to talk about. But so you asked how our mission has evolved. We've evolved
Mhm.
from, saving women from forced abortion to saving women from sex selective abortion of of baby girls, women who want to keep their daughters, And so the way that we do that is we are the only organization in the world that has a network on the ground inside of China where we have field workers that can go to the door of a woman who is being pressured to either abort or abandon her baby girl. Or another big problem that's in the countryside is that these women are so impoverished and so stressed that they are unable to produce milk for their daughters. And then they feel like they
Mhm.
have to give her away or else she won't survive. Because milk powder is very expensive in China. So we go to their doors and we say, "Congratulations on your baby girl. Girls are as good as boys in the eyes of God," which is something they've never heard before. And then we say, "We will offer you a stipend of $25 a month for a year." And a lot of these families were on our program for 2, 3, and 4 years, but to
Mhm.
enable you to empower you to keep your daughter. And
Wonderful.
so that $25 a month is a lot of money in the Chinese countryside. And it empowers the woman to go to her husband, to go to her mother-in-law, because those are the ones who are trying to get her to abort or abandon her daughter or give her away, as they say. And say, "Look, I can't abort, I can't abandon this baby girl. She's a lucky girl. She's already bringing money into the family." And so we use the
Mhm.
superstition around luck to save the lives, or at least to keep these baby girls together with their mothers. So that's an expansion, and there are other expansions as well, but I've been talking for a long time, so I'll stop.
That's so beautiful. Another question about why in China and other countries boys are preferred and little girls are killed. Is it also financially because of the dowry that one day the women will have to pay in getting married and that the families are stressed financially? Is that part of it?
I think the dowry system is more in India, which also has a problem with gendercide.
Hmm.
Um, their numbers are not quite as bad as China's, but they do have a problem with that. So if any listener has an entree into India, like, please contact me, because we would like to get into India and start saving baby girls there too. But I think the dowry is more in Indian culture,
Hmm.
than it is in Chinese culture.
Well, thanks for that clarification. So many Americans think that China ended coercive population control in 2015. Can you explain the misconceptions around this and what's actually still happening?
So China has moved from a one-child policy to a two-child policy to a three-child policy. And so with respect to the two-child policy, let's just talk about the two-child policy. First of all, under the two-child policy, people can be forcibly aborted if they are having a third child.
Mm.
Just think about it. Just think, anybody who has more than 2 kids. First of all, I'm a 4th child, all right? So under the three-child policy, I would have been forcibly aborted. I
Mhm.
would not have been allowed to live. And then I have 2 younger sisters who are 5th and 6th children. The fact that there's a three-child policy doesn't mean the end of forced abortion. People will say, "Well, isn't China facing like a demographic winter? Don't they need more children?" And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And that's why they went from a one-child policy to a two-child policy to a three-child policy. But why don't they just get rid of all
Right.
all population control? Why don't they say anybody can have as many babies as they want? Why do they have to maintain a three-child policy? And I've been calling for the end of the three-child policy, for years now, and they won't end it. And I have my own opinion about why they will not end it. And I think that they will not end it because they want, number one, to maintain the ability to terrorize everybody, because that's how they maintain control. But then number two, I think they want to selectively enforce this against disfavored minorities, such as the Tibetans and the Uyghurs. So that's, I think, also one of the motives for not getting rid of the three-child policy. But I wanna go back to the two-child policy, okay? So when China moved from a one-child policy to a two-child policy, everybody said, "Oh, this is great. Now, people can have 2 children, and so they'll let more of the girls live." And I immediately said, "No, we are going to see, sex selective abortion of second daughters." And I was right. I'll just tell you a story of something that happened under the two-child policy. So there was a couple. They had a girl, and under the one-child policy, they figured they were one and done. Okay, they were done having kids. Then China moves from a one-child policy to a two-child policy, and the husband says to the wife, "Oh, great, we can have another kid. Let's have a boy." And he forced her to abort 4 baby girls in a year, and then she died. The Chinese Communist Party has so browbeaten the population into thinking that one child is enough and one child is best, that and it's very expensive to raise a kid in China. You know, you think, "Oh, it's a communist country, they will have, free healthcare, free education." Oh, no. No, no, no. You have to pay for healthcare, you have to pay for education.
Wow.
So it's very expensive to raise, a kid in China, so most couples, or a lot of couples, really just wanna have 1 kid. Or they're having a problem now with couples who don't wanna have any kids. Okay,
Mm.
because for a number of reasons, we can get into that. But a lot of the people who are willing to go to the effort and expense of having a second child are people who've had a girl on the first child, and they're willing to go into that to embark on the journey of having a second child if it's gonna be a boy. And so the girls, there remains to be gendercide, in China on second daughters and especially third daughters. Now under the three-child policy, people are willing to have that third kid after if they only have, like, 2 daughters and they wanna have a son, and so there's the rate of boys to girls in China for third children is 133 boys born for every 100 girls born, which means about a third of the girls are being aborted.
Wow. So would you say that you were talking about the populations in China? Everyone's under the three-child policy, right? Are groups like the Uyghurs and other minority groups more surveilled than other groups? And how does the government control this? You mentioned check-ins. Do they still do check-ins for families? They keep track of how many children each family has, and then they have the woman come in for a check-in to see if she's pregnant or not? How does that all work technically?
It is very, very difficult to get information out of China because if someone, discloses something to the Western media, believe me, all hell will break loose, not only for them, but for their entire extended family. One of the ways that they enforce the one-child policy is if somebody escaped, um, let's say somebody was illegally pregnant and she ran into hiding, they would tear down her house and the house of her neighbors. So you have a surveillance system of people surveilling each other because the neighborhood doesn't wanna get torn down, so if so your neighbors are surveilling you to make sure that you're not illegally pregnant. And then one time I testified in Congress with a woman who, had 8 forced abortions, and the way that they found out about her is that in the factory, you have to prove that you are menstruating every month in the bathroom. So they had like, CCP, police in the bathrooms, making sure everybody's menstruating. And then not only that, but your working group would rat you out if you're pregnant because the whole working group would get punished if one person was pregnant, illegally pregnant. Now, that was in, like, the '90s, the early 2000s. Now under the three-child policy, I first of all, they don't have, like, the human tracking that they had before, like, everything was done by human beings spying on each other. They had, somebody who was you could be ratted out by your family, your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, people who sat in the village and just looked at women's abdomens to see if anybody looked pregnant, and if they did look pregnant, they would stop them and ask to see their birth permit, and if that woman did not have her birth permit on her at that moment, meaning it wasn't in a drawer at home, okay, she could be dragged off for a forced abortion. Now I think that that there's surveillance is more through AI and the social credit system and all of that. Like I said, it's very difficult to get information out of China, and I don't know exactly how they are surveilling people now, other than that they have this tremendous AI surveillance system that they surveil everything about you, including your reproductive status.
Hmm. How does your organization gain evidence about what's going on in China currently? Well, both under the one child, two child, and three child policies. You mentioned that there's people on the ground. Do you also have people that you have spoken with who escaped and can testify or give evidence concerning these situations in China?
Document that was sent to me from China, that formed the basis of my first testimony. That was the only time that that's ever happened. I've never had somebody send a document to me from China. What I do have is, number one, the Congressional Executive Commission on China, is very well staffed, and what they are able to do is search the internet for regulations on Chinese websites in various provinces and even little cities and villages and towns, and see what the regulations are, and like if they see something like strike hard against, you know, uh, too many births, the Congressional Executive Commission on China will pick that up. It's very powerful what they're able to do. So that's where I get some of my information. Then there is Adrian Zenz at the Victims of Communism, who is the world leader in analyzing data coming out of Xinjiang. So let me tell you what he did. He's amazing. Basically, based on receipts, like just invoices and receipts, he was able to piece together how many more IUDs were being sent into Xinjiang, all the kind of stuff that you use in coercive population control. And also was able to show that the number of births in Xinjiang had plummeted over a span of years. And I think that his findings added to, or were big part of the basis for the U.S. determination under Secretary of State Pompeo that China was committing genocide against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. But he did that on the basis of like just receipts that he was able to find online. It was unbelievable. And then there are people who have escaped, and then they have anecdotal evidence um, of forced abortions in the camps in Xinjiang. And then I have my own network. So I have my network that where we're saving baby girls, and we're also saving widows, which I would like to talk about. But so my network is in a rural, like remote rural community in China. And so I know what's happening in that community, and then I can suppose that it's happening elsewhere as well. But that's sort of the direct line I have for information.
Hmm. And you've said that CCP's population policy is the greatest crime against women in the world. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that?
Well, I said that under the one child policy, and as I mentioned before, that impacts 1/5 of the women in the world, but it also impacts the men. Just imagine what it would be like for a man who wants to protect his wife and his child, having his wife grabbed out of their bed and forcibly aborted, just as she's about to give birth, and what that does to a man. I mean, and then there was also a situation. I have a photograph of a man who, his wife had had a second child, and the family planning police, the womb police, I call them, came to his door, and he knew he was in trouble, and he said, "Okay, I know we broke the law. I'm willing to pay the fine, but if you could just be peaceable, I would just, can you please be peaceable? And can we work this out peaceably? And they took a bottle and they broke it over his head. And I've got a picture of him lying on the floor bleeding, and he was
Mm.
permanently disabled from that. Permanently disabled from that. When I said that it was the worst crime against women in the world, you're talking about hundreds of millions of women who were living in abject terror that, if they got pregnant without a birth permit, that they would be forcibly aborted up to the ninth month of pregnancy. Some of these forced abortions were so violent that the women themselves died along with their full-term babies. Um,
Wow.
and then forced sterilizations that, these were not carried out by highly trained gynecological surgeons in nice, antiseptic hospitals. I think that they could train, you and me in 2 weeks with the same level of training that these people got. And just grabbing people, giving them a tubal ligation, so you're cutting into their abdomen. And then these women are butchered. There's so many women just became disabled after these horrible operations, and the infections. And then you have the sex selective abortion of baby girls, which is not done by the government, but it was greatly exacerbated by the one child policy, because if people could only have one kid, a lot of people wanted that one kid to be a boy. Um,
Mhm.
so the girls were selectively aborted, and so, it's hard to think of worse atrocities than these against women. And then when you put that together with the number of women involved, that's why I said that it's the greatest, human
Mhm.
rights violation against women in the world and in the history of the world.
Yeah. Do you know if the minority populations, the Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and others in China, do they have even stricter rules for how many babies they have? Or, for example, the ones who are imprisoned or in concentration camps there, can they even have children? What does that look like for them?
Okay. So I can't talk about the Falun Gong practitioners because I haven't seen any evidence regarding the Falun Gong, but I'll tell you about the Uyghur women, because this is something that, again, Adrian Zenz, I believe, is the one who pulled this together. But anyway, what happens I mean, it's unbelievable, Arena. Okay. So okay, under the one child policy, minorities were allowed to have 3 children. Did you know that? So the
No.
ethnic minorities, under the one child policy, were allowed to have 3 children because they were
Hmm.
minorities. I don't know why China made that accommodation, but they did. Okay. So then the two-child policy comes along, and, um, they go back to the Uyghur women who have 3 children and say, "You violated the two-child policy. You have 3 children. You have too many children." And then women,
That's
of course, would
crazy.
say, well, you said that we could. I mean, this, you said that we could have 3 children." And then the family planning police would say, "Well, now it's 2 children, and we want to enforce this uniformly throughout China, and therefore," they would do things like, they would say that if a couple had 3 children, that was evidence that they were religious extremists.
Hmm.
So then they would take the husband away and put him in a concentration camp. And then there is evidence that they would take a Han Chinese man and move him into that household
Hmm.
to be the man in that household, and I don't know, rape. I don't know what he was doing in that household, but also spy on the women to see if they did anything that showed that they were religious extremists. And a lot of kids, the mother and the father ended up going into these concentration camps, and then the kids were taken away and put in an orphanage that was Chinese speaking, so they weren't allowed to speak their native language anymore. And then they were put through an education program that was a brainwashing about how superior China is, and Chinese culture is to Uyghur culture, to try to kill them culturally, to
Mhm.
kill the cultural. That's what they have done. Now, that information was disclosed a few years ago. I'm not sure if we've gotten an update because, like I said, it's really hard to get information out of Xinjiang. You have to
Mhm.
find people who have escaped, number 1, and then number 2, who are willing to speak, because if they speak, and if they're found out that they are speaking, then who knows what will happen to their family? Could be
Mhm.
murdered, you know?
Wow. It's crazy what's happening and what has happened and what continues to happen in China. You mentioned your work going into remote places in China and assisting moms who want to keep their baby girls, and this is the Save a Girl campaign. Can you walk us through how that program works? How do you find out that these women exist, who they are? How do the people know them, and how do they logistically get the funding to them and safely? What does that look like?
So I can't give you all the details, but this is what I will say. So we have a network on the ground inside of China. We are in our 12th year. We are well known and well loved in these little villages because, and by the way, our network is Christian,
Mhm.
very strong Christians, who, and every year we give all the families of the baby girls and also the families of the widows, um, or just the widows, but not the families of the widows. We give the widows a Christmas gift, which opens us up, uh, the door to telling them about Christmas and how God so loved the world that He gave His only, begotten Son, and then also at Easter to talk about the resurrection, um, and a lot of the families of the baby girls and the widows are coming to faith. But because we are well known, well trusted, and well loved, women will refer us to other women, that they know are in trouble. So like our current network, like the people who are already receiving aid from us, will tell us about others, and then we will go to that other person and find out what their situation is. So then I have the field worker will write up a report, that will go through the person in the United States that translates things and kind of coordinates things from US soil and then come to me, and then I will approve it or not approve it. I mean, I think I've not approved one person in 12 years. Um,
Mhm.
but in any case, so then so I send money into China. I'm not gonna say how the logistics of this. It's not a good thing for me to say the logistics of it, but what I will say is that when the women, when they receive the cash, they have to sign a chart that says that they've received it. So we have a reporting system that was developed by a professional forensic accountant. And so we have documentation that every penny that was meant for these women went to the women.
Mhm. That's beautiful. Are you seeing any change in attitudes toward baby girls, given China's demographic collapse? And you were talking about how there are so many more men in China than women.
Well, yes and no. So in my own area where we are active saving baby girls, that the attitudes are changing towards baby girls. So that is something that's very heartening. And what the mothers will say is, my neighbors look down on me. My neighbors mocked me because this is my second daughter or my third daughter. Everybody has said that, that we're cursed. They actually believe that having two baby
Mhm.
girls or especially three baby girls shows that your family is cursed. Um, it's almost unbelievable. But then they say, "But, these wonderful Christians from the other side of the world are helping us because we have a baby girl, and now we see that having a baby girl is a blessing." So in our little tiny area of China, the attitudes are changing, but in terms of the greater China, and of course, we would love to have the resources to expand, and get this word out more broadly in China, but as I mentioned, nationwide, the statistic for, girls versus boys that has been released by the Chinese Communist Party, and so, it's probably even worse than what this statistic is, but the statistic is that there are 133 boys born for every 100 girls born for third children, and that indicates that people think that that a girl is a liability and that she should be aborted. So we still have really an infinite amount of work to do.
Hmm. Now, we were talking before about widows, and they are also a very vulnerable population. Can you tell us about the widows in China?
Yes, thank you for asking about the widows in China because I call them the invisible victims of the one child policy. Nobody thinks about them, nobody talks about them. And it's really a tragic situation. So, senior suicide in China is on the rise. And this is women and men. And I believe that this has to do with a number of factors, one of which is the Chinese Communist Party's atheistic and materialistic view of people, which they have pushed down into the population. Traditional Chinese culture, number one, values and adores children, and number two, venerates the elderly.
Mm.
And the Chinese Communist Party has managed to completely reverse both of those. In terms of the elderly, the materialistic view of a human being, that they don't believe in God, and all they care about is what are you doing for society now? So that in this case of elderly people in the Chinese countryside, they have already spent their lives tilling the fields, raising their children, raising their grandchildren, and now they're old and now they need help. And so, as far as the Chinese Communist Party is concerned, now they are expendable and they
Mhm.
don't support them. And that attitude has gone into the population. So that whereas in the past, a couple would have like a farming couple would have an extended family, they would have lots of kids, then their kids would have lots of kids, and that extended family would support the couple in their old age, and they would have been venerated as being wise and having been, the patriarch and the matriarch of the family. And now, there's an example where there's a widow that we are supporting. And by the way, with respect to widows that we're supporting, we say that we are supporting them $25 a month for the rest of their lives. For the
Wow.
for the babies, we are supporting them $25 a month for a year, although it usually extends 2, 3, and 4 years. But we're just trying to save their lives and just get them on their feet. For the widows, it's like, "We will help you for the rest of your life." So and I'll go into that more later, but there was a widow whose husband had died, and what she told our field worker that when her husband had been diagnosed with whatever it was, I don't remember whether it was cancer, heart disease, whatever, that their daughter-in-law actually went to them and said to him, "Why don't you just commit suicide? You are draining the family's resources with your illness." And then she pointed to another woman in their community that when she found out that she had breast cancer, she hung herself on a
Mm.
tree in the backyard to save her family the medical expenses. And this is what this daughter-in-law was promoting to them as being the noble thing to do.
Mm.
China has, I think, the highest female suicide rate in the world, especially for elderly women in the countryside. And these women, they because of the one child policy, they don't have and because of the attitudes that are fomented by the Chinese Communist Party, they don't have anybody to support them. Nobody thinks about them. Nobody cares about them. Some of them are lots of them are disabled. Lots of them have, like a disabled child that they are trying to care for where they're disabled themselves. It's just
Mhm.
it's horrific. It's horrific. So our
Mm.
field workers, they go and visit these women once a month, and they come to them and they say, "You are a human being created by God in his image, and you
Mhm.
have infinite value." And this is something that they have never, ever heard before for the officially atheistic Chinese Communist Party.
Mhm.
And they say, "We're gonna give you $25 a month to help you eat every day, maybe get some coal or whatever in the winter because where our network is very cold in the winter." And the women, these widows, are like, "Wait a minute. So what do you want in return?" And we just say, "What we want in return is for you to eat every day." You know?
Mhm.
and to know that you're loved. And it just blows their mind. I mean, these women, these widows have never experienced that kind of just basically human or Christian generosity of wanting to help someone just because they need help. Just because they need help,
Mhm.
that's the reason. And you were not asking anything in return. And so we have many widows, many dozens of widows that we are supporting at $25 a month for the rest of their lives. And if you want to find out how to either help with the Save a Girl campaign or the Save a Widow campaign, you can go out to Women's Rights Without Frontiers.org. That's Women's Rights Without Frontiers.org. And at the upper right hand, there's a big, red button that says Save a Girl in China. There's another red button that says Save a Widow in China. And there's another red button that says Save a Widow in Uganda. So that's a whole nother story because
Mm.
we're saving widows in Uganda also. But, you know, there are programs like widows programs where you can get a grant to save widows, but not our kind of widows. Those grants are for widows who have young kids and then to train them in a skill so that their family doesn't fall below the poverty line. And I support that. I think that's a wonderful thing to do. I don't dispute that that's a wonderful thing to do. But what happens with
Right.
widows who are completely abandoned, who can't contribute to society? They're 90 years old. They're not going to learn a
Mhm.
skill. Are they just trash? Because that's the way that they're being treated. And we treat them as human beings created by God in his image who are deserving of support in their old age after they've already contributed everything that they have to give.
Right. And I mean, this is part and parcel for the communist philosophy, which is if you're not productive, quote unquote, then you're not useful. You're not, you don't have any value, which is a very materialistic and atheistic way of looking at human value. And you mentioned too that now the way that they're monitoring people is through surveillance, propaganda, restricted access. Can you talk a little bit more about that? If you know how they're finding out who's having more than 3 children, or who's pregnant through, you mentioned AI. Do you know other systems they're using?
What I know about is the China social credit system. And so what this is it's a system of complete surveillance and totalitarian control. So what they do is they have an app on your phone, but what they have done is they have amalgamated or combined everything about you. So they have, real-time facial recognition, um, real-time geolocation. They know what you look like. They know where you are, where you live, where you work. It's tied to your social media accounts. They know everything that you have posted on social media. Of course, your medical records, which would be reflect, if you're pregnant, it would reflect that. And then also the real-time geolocation. If you go to the hospital or the doctor office, they're going to know that. Whatever records you have, medical
Mm.
records you have are in there. So like I said, your social media account, your internet spending history, your internet search history. So you can tell a lot about somebody and what they're thinking about by what they search for on the internet. Your criminal history, your medical history, your bank accounts, your credit cards, so you can see whether you are buying any kind of pregnancy related products or whatever. And then they put all that together into a score about how compliant of a Chinese communist sheep you are. And if you're a completely compliant person, you never make any waves, you follow all the rules, you pay all your bills on time, etc., you get vaccinated, then you can have a high score and then you can lead what looks like a normal life. But you also know that if you ever step out of line, if you criticize the government or whatever, that your score will fall. And if your score falls, there's punishment. So the punishments can begin with you lose your job, you can't travel, your kid can't go to a good school, you can't borrow money, so you can't buy a home, or start a business. And if you keep it up, they will sever you from your credit cards and your bank accounts. And if you keep that up, they will just disappear you. So that is that's the total system, and in that system, no doubt, they can figure out, who's pregnant and who's not. Um, so that's my assumption. I mean, I have not heard anything coming out of China about, specifically, like, here's how they figured out that I, am pregnant for a 4th time or something like that. But
Mhm.
they can no doubt figure it out.
Right. That's really scary. And obviously, this information is widely available anywhere in the world, right? It's just that China is using this information as a surveillance system within this communist regime, and just basically putting their thumb on each individual, right?
So, Irina, this when I saw the vaccine passport system being rolled out in the previous administration in connection with the COVID vaccines, that's when I realized that that system could provide the infrastructure for the China social credit system going to the United States and worldwide. And that's when I founded my other organizations. Okay, the Stop Vaccine Passports Task Force, I co-founded Sovereignty Coalition, founded Anti-Globalist International, but that's a whole nother interview. But yes, that's exactly right. That this infrastructure is being built all over the world, including in the United States, and that is why I have directed a lot of my energies towards stopping it.
Well, we're certainly going to have you on other episodes to talk about all of that because it's super important for our listeners to understand what's going on. So, this social credit system that you're talking about and the surveillance, how would you say it's impacting women, mothers, and activists in China, and even their ability to have free movement, to speak freely about whatever's going on there?
Well, in terms of women and mothers, China wants to encourage women to be mothers, and so they do things on the social credit system like you get extra points if you buy diapers because that indicates that you're a parent, and then so that will give you a boost. So they're trying to encourage people in that way. But in terms of activists and dissidents, I mean, this is several years ago. There was a bank that shut people out of their accounts in China. Actually, I think the bank was imploding. But anyway, so there is a people are going to come and protest this bank, and people who had accounts in this bank were going to show up at a certain city at a certain time to protest what was going on with this bank. And when they started gathering and like going on the trains and stuff, all of a sudden their vaccine passport went from being green, meaning that they were vaccinated and they were not sick, to being red, meaning that they were sick or they're unvaccinated or whatever. So number one, they couldn't get on the train, and number two, I don't know whether they were taken off to quarantine camps, based on this red, this their vaccine passport turning from green to red. So this is a way for absolutely stifling, dissent. Of course, with the internet search history and all of that, dissidents in China, if they post something against the government, which they would do, then they can't travel, and their lives can get just basically shut down in a lot of major ways. So yeah, that is it's a method of totalitarian control, especially when it is combined with, a digital currency, like a central bank digital currency, where you can't even use cash, So
Uh-huh.
how can you buy your groceries? You c you are completely paralyzed. You are completely paralyzed.
Right. It's super scary. And again, we're going to have an in depth conversation just about this in another episode. Um, so it's interesting the dichotomy between the China who on one hand is saying we have a one child policy, two child policy, three child policy, and at the same time now, even within these limits, they're encouraging families to have children. Obviously after the fallout of so many children being killed and women forcibly aborted. So because of this, you've spoken about China's missing women crisis causing a massive trafficking demand. How is this playing out in surrounding nations?
Well, actually, I don't know if I was the first person to make that connection or not, but I will tell you that before I stepped out into this whole arena, I went to a trafficking seminar or a briefing in Washington D.C., and I raised my hand and said, "How does China's one-child policy contribute to trafficking in Asia?" And the whole panel just stared at me like blankly. Okay, so this is something that I really hammered on in the European Parliament. The first time I spoke there, and it's been in these reports, trafficking in person tip reports. Since then, that China typically almost every year it's it's ranked on the lowest tier of nations in terms of trafficking, meaning that it's a destination of trafficking. So this is women being trafficked to China
Mm,
because of the fact that they have an estimated 30 to 40 million men who will never marry because their future wives were aborted, before they were born.
mhm,
It also provides women are trafficked from China, and the Chinese Communist Party is not doing what the international community says it should be doing to stop this trafficking. And there have been reports of Chinese Communist Party officials actually colluding with the traffickers. So the people I feel the sorriest for, are women who are trafficked from North Korea. There's people in North Korea who are so desperate to get out of that horrific situation that they will
mhm,
cross the border, cross the river at the border, thinking that they're coming to safety in China, and then they will get snapped up immediately into the sex slave trade. And then if they try to blow the whistle on it, if they are able to get to a police officer in China saying, "Look, they're trafficking me," then what happens, and what has happened historically, is they've been repatriated back to
mm.
North Korea, and the penalty for escaping North Korea can be as severe as the death penalty for, 3
Wow.
generations of your family. I mean, it's
Wow.
just it's really severe. So that's the situation, as I understand it, concerning,
Mhm.
trafficking in China.
Yeah, that's awful, and again, this is the result of killing baby girls, right? And
Right.
then there's a whole, population of men that can't get married, as you said, so it's a problem, and that is fueling, trafficking. But also because of the demographic decline, and China is experiencing the fastest demographic decline in history. And what does that mean for women and for CCP's future policies?
Okay, well, let's start talking about what it means for men. For some men, so there's a phenomenon in China called bachelor villages.
Hmm.
So women are upwardly mobile because there aren't enough of them. So what happens is that in these villages out in poor villages out in the countryside, is that the young marriage age women move to the local town or the local city where they have better prospects, to get married and to have a better life. So then there's nothing left in these villages other than men, and also elderly, and they call them
Mhm.
bachelor villages. And they're just villages filled with frustrated men who will never marry.
Mhm.
And these men have been called bare branches because they're the end of the family line. They will never marry,
Mhm.
and they will never reproduce, and they are just the end of the family line. And this is a recipe, of course, for social instability, which would make me nervous
Mhm.
if I were a country next to China about what are they going to do with these men, these marriage age men who are also military age men. So there's that problem. The second problem is that, you know, China used to be regarded as the cheap labor market. You should manufacture in China because there's cheap labor there. Well, there's not anymore. I mean, the labor pool has been going down in recent years because of the one-child policy, and so international investors have been moving their factories to other places where the labor is in fact less expensive than it is in China. And then, of course, there is the whole senior tsunami issue where the China does not have enough young people to support its elderly.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned earlier, senior suicide is a big problem in China, and I worry
Mhm.
about the senior citizens because, according to the Chinese Communist Party's sort of atheistic, materialistic worldview, these people are less than worthless. I mean, they're just I guess you they would say they're useless eaters, and who knows what could happen to them. So that's one of the big reasons that we are supporting widows in the
Mhm.
countryside. So those are the demographic, problems that I see coming down the pike for
Do you
China.
do you think that as a result of these demographic problems, do you foresee that the CCP will then go to the other extreme and push pro-natalist coercion, where they're forcing women to have more babies to make up for all of this?
You know, this is the thing, Irina. It would be within their ideology to do that, but if they
Mhm.
thought they could get away with it, right? And I don't think that they can really get away with this. I mean, I don't see how that they could force women to become pregnant and have babies against their will. I think that they would if they could. But what we are seeing is that they are pressuring, not forcing, not coercing, but pressuring people who are eligible. In other words, if you are a married couple, right? So every married couple can have up to 3 kids. If you're unmarried, still technically you can be forcibly aborted as well as fourth children. But they're giving incentives saying, they're gonna give maternity leave and paternity leave and pay for childcare and this and that, trying to incentivize people to have more kids, or if they're government workers, they can even, withhold promotion, or offer promotion if you do have your full 3 children. Um, but but the people of China, many of the women and the men in China are not responding to this. The Chinese Communist Party really thinks it's God, and I think that they think that they can shut down reproduction when they want to. They say, "Oh, we have a population explosion. We're gonna shut off, we're gonna have a one-child policy and just shut it off." And then when it's convenient for us to have more kids, we're gonna open it up again, and we're gonna go to two-child policy, three-child policy, and of course, everybody's gonna have babies on demand. And actually, people are not having babies on demand. There are a number of things going on here. Number one, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's expensive to raise a child in China. It's not they don't have free healthcare. They don't have free education. Also, the Chinese Communist Party has browbeaten the population long enough into really believing that one child is the perfect number for a family. And then beyond this, during COVID, there was the young people took a huge hit that, not many people are talking about. So, what the experience was during COVID, as as in certain report. First of all, I don't know if you even saw this, but like there were just intense lockdowns during COVID, especially in Shanghai, and I will never forget this. It was a video of people who had been, like, soldered into their buildings and maybe even soldered or locked into their
Mhm.
apartments, and the government had said they were gonna deliver food, and they did not deliver the food.
Mm.
So the people were s this was at night, and they were standing out on their balconies, and so you could see all these high rises, it's night, and you see all these high rises all around, people standing out on their balconies and just
Mm.
shrieking into the night. And at that time, there was a video that went viral, and it was COVID police. So they called them the big whites. Okay, so they had like a big white hazmat suit, they almost looked like astronauts or something, coming to the door of this young couple saying, "Blah, blah, blah, you need to get your COVID vaccine," and the couple was refusing.
Mhm.
And then they said, we will punish you. We will punish you, and we will punish your children. They didn't have any children. But, and then the young man said, we are the last generation.
Mm.
So there is
Wow.
a sense, and I don't know whether it's eased up, but there was a sense during COVID of young people not wanting to bring a baby into a
Mhm.
world where they could suffer the way that they were suffering under COVID. So, I almost feel like it's a protest. It's a
Mhm.
protest against the Chinese Communist Party. It's like, I'm not going to contribute to this society by having a baby, you know?
Mhm.
So there's that as well.
From what you were saying earlier too, it not only for human dignity, the fact that people should be free to have as few or as many children as they desire, but also from the demographic perspective, it would be in China's interest to lift any policies, right? And obviously, it's not you can't turn around culture that easily, as you said. Once you start pushing people in that direction, it's hard to turn them back and to be open to having children. So, yeah, China's in deep water with that, and we'll watch the developments as they continue, and hopefully, they do away with these policies. But of course, obviously, the work you do is important because they haven't done away with their totalitarian system and all the problems that that's caused. I want to look now into the future and um, hear from you about what testimonies or stories from the women you've helped have stayed with you the longest.
We have hundreds and hundreds. Every single situation is just so heartbreaking and dramatic, and that's why we're helping them. But one of the ones that sticks in my mind is of a young woman who got pregnant, and her mother-in-law was pressuring her to have an ultrasound. And these young women, they don't want to get an ultrasound because they know that what it means is that if it's a boy, everybody's going to be super happy, but if it's a girl, they are going to be pressured to abort the baby. So this woman, typically, like most of these young women, she dragged her feet, did not have the ultrasound till she was like 7 or 8 months pregnant. So, and by the way, all of these sex selective abortion of baby girls are late term because it takes
Mhm,
until you're, I think, at least 6 months to be able to see the gender of a child on an ultrasound.
mhm,
So she waited, probably 7 months and finally went in to get the ultrasound and discovered that she was pregnant not with 1, but with 2 baby
mm,
girls. So even under the two-child policy, she was going to use up her entire quota, and both of them would be girls, which would mean that her husband, her mother-in-law, would never have a son or a grandson. So,
mhm,
predictably, the pressure immediately began for her to abort these girls, and she did not want to abort them, and she did not know what to do. She did not know where to turn. And thank God our field worker found out about her, went and visited her home, and said, "Congratulations on your daughters. Girls are as good as boys in the eyes of God, and we will give you 2 monthly stipends for a year to empower you to keep those daughters." So that's $25 times 2, $50 a month to empower her to keep her daughters. That's a lot of money in the Chinese
mhm,
countryside. So she was able to go to her husband, go to her mother-in-law and say, "Oh, look, I can't abort or abandon this girl. She's a lucky girl. She is, she's already these 2 girls, these baby girls are bringing money into the family so that she was able to give birth to her 2 daughters, and, of course, within, months, everybody was in love with them, and now they're 2 beautiful, glorious twin
mhm.
sisters. So that's just one example of hundreds that we have saved.
Wow, that's really beautiful, and to know that you and your organization helped to save them must be so encouraging, right?
You know what I'm saying? It's like people give to in order to save babies in China. So without them, this would not be happening as well. So,
Mhm, mhm. What legacy do you hope your work will leave for women, for freedom, and for the world?
well, in terms in terms of women's rights without frontiers, every life saved is infinitely precious. So we save one baby girl's life, that girl will likely become somebody's beloved wife, and then the mother of who knows how many,
Mhm,
grandmother. You save one life and it multiplies through the generations. And then also these women are coming to faith. I don't know how many baptisms that we've had, because we have an open door. It's not like we are just coming over and saying, do you know Jesus Christ, as your Lord and Savior? No, I mean, we are saving them out of the worst situation that they have ever been in, not asking anything in return. And so then they're like, who are you and why are you doing this? You guys are so completely different. They've never experienced anything like this before. And that's when we say, we are believers in Jesus Christ. And then it opens the door to talk about him. And many, like there's one girl where 3 generations of her family were saved. And so she
Mm.
was, her parents, and her grandparents, all now are going to church. And she's got the brightest smile. She's just, it's just a wonderful thing. So so that's a legacy that goes into eternity. It's not just a
Mhm.
legacy that's on this earth. It's a legacy that goes into eternity as well. And then also these widows, they are counted for nothing by the Chinese Communist Party and even by their own society. But in God's eyes, they're infinitely precious. And I believe that, that saving these widows is something that is there's a Bible verse that says true religion is this, which is basically saving orphans and widows in their
Mhm.
distress. And that's exactly what we're doing at Women's Rights Without Frontiers. And just hope that um, that we know that we are relieving tremendous suffering in this life, and then also hopefully bringing people to eternal life as well through the grace of God.
Mm. Well, that's so beautiful, and we are so grateful for your courage and your leadership. How can people come alongside the work that you're doing? Can they donate somewhere? Are there petitions or anything else that they could do to also add their name to the list and to help with your mission?
So the website is Women's Rights Without Frontiers. Now, if I had to do it over again, I would have picked a shorter name, but I was young and naive when I founded the organization. So the website is all of that. It's Women's Rights Without Frontiers.org. Hopefully you put a link in the show notes so people
Yes, we'll definitely put a link.
yeah, click on it as opposed to spelling all that out. So then, you can donate in the upper right. There's a big red button that says "Save a Girl in China," and then you can watch a video there. It's 3 minutes long, and see the faces of real baby girls that we're saving in China. Then there's also Save a Widow in China. Right, that button is right underneath it. There's another 3-minute video of widows that we're saving in China. Then there's another one under it, Save a Widow in Uganda. We haven't really spoken about that, but if you're interested in that, you can click on that button. There's a petition, against forced abortion in China. We've got, I think, 41,000 signatures on that right now. So that's basically it. I mean, you can donate all of those, the Save a Girl, Save a Widow in China, Save a Widow in Uganda, all have links to the donation page. We're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization, so anything you donate is tax deductible, and you will get a tax receipt for it. And we need donations. I mean, it's very expensive. We send over about $6,000 or more into China every month, and it's just covered.
Mhm.
Most of its coverage is out of the general fund. We don't have donations to cover that. So whatever anybody can do, that's great.
Well, we'll certainly put a links to all of those, and we're so grateful for all the work that you do, and know that we are encouraging you, and that we're beside you as well. And hopefully, people can donate and spread the word about what Women's Rights Without Frontiers is doing. And we are happy to have you back on the show as well to talk about some of the other issues that we discussed. Thank you so much, Reggie.
Thank you very much. And one other thing that people can do is pray for the field workers. Pray that God will
Mhm.
keep them under the shadow of his wing, because we have never been discovered by the authorities. We need to keep it that way, but it's God's protection. So please pray for the safety and the protection of the field workers. And thank you so much, Irina. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Bioethics Babe podcast. If you've enjoyed this content, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and your favorite podcast platform, and share with your friends and family. Also check out bioethicsbabe.com for the latest episodes and resources.